Hello, and welcome to today's training industry webinar, Customer Education, the Hidden Edge for Your Customer Experience Plan, sponsored by Adobe. I'm Liz Spate, Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over some housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat window to interact with our speaker with any comments. As for questions, please submit all questions to the Q&A section on your toolbar below. We will address all comments and questions throughout the event or at the end of the program during our Q&A section. We would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow @Adobe and hashtag TI webinars as you share your favorite takeaway with your colleagues. When the webinar ends, you should receive a short evaluation survey. We always welcome your feedback on things like content, speakers, topics, or anything else you would like to share with us today. Be sure to complete that survey after the event. As always, today's webinar will be recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com and will receive a follow-up email from us, and will include a link to the on-demand program for you to share with your team. If you've attended one of these programs in the past, thank you so much for joining us again. And if this is your first webinar with us, welcome. At Training Industry, we offer dozens of webinars with subjects ranging from AI, analytics, to onboarding, upskilling, and reskilling. We cover about every topic relevant to leaders of training organizations around the globe. Now, to get started, let me introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Alan Partridge. He is the Director of Evangelism at Adobe and has over 20 years of experience in e-learning, education, games, and multimedia development. He has researched and reported on authentic learning solutions for audiences around the world for the past decade. So please welcome Dr. Alan.
Thanks so much, Liz, and hello to everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. It's great to be able to spend this time with you, all of you. It's always fun to do these sessions and to share the latest excitements and innovations and ideas. I always point out that the wealth of knowledge in the room is all of us together as a community. And so I really do encourage you to participate in the chat as actively as you feel comfortable. There, I'll try to follow along periodically. I love getting your feedback and hearing your responses. Ultimately, many of you will have had experiences implementing customer education solutions, and I think that wealth of information can be as helpful as anything that I'm going to present to you from the research and from my basic notes today. So I hope that you'll feel free to kind of jump into the chat, participate actively, be a part of the conversation, and we'll all learn together thanks to the wealth of knowledge that we all kind of share. So let's dig right into customer education, the hidden edge of your customer experience plan. I'm going to be sharing research throughout today's session. You'll notice that the research is always tagged on the bottom, and you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint deck in your email after today's session. So if you want to be able to share this with colleagues or use this for internal meetings or things like that, don't worry, you have that. And you'll find that I always have the source at the bottom of the slide when you see data and statistics. So this particular set of stats is coming to us from an article called Creating a Differentiated Customer Experience with Data and Analytics, and that's from IDC. The major kind of discovery here is that 92% of customers are reporting that customer experience has a significant impact on their future purchasing decisions, and that 84% believe that experience is as important as product or price. And our point here is that customer experience is ultimately really at the heart of establishing and maintaining a solid relationship between your brand and the people who purchase the things that the company has to offer. So when we look at customer experiences today, pretty much every interaction that a customer has with any aspect of the company is being carefully curated by personnel from the customer experience team, from the marketing team, and from all the other teams along the way. Now, one of those spaces that has not traditionally been curated or been brought into the fold as easily or as successfully has been learning and education. In fact, if we look historically at the way that learning and training have existed in organizations, generally speaking, it first sort of rears its head as training for employees internally. Oftentimes, it starts with things like compliance, or it starts with regulatory systems that need to be upheld in order for the business to stay on target. And that led to a lot of alignment with traditional education, learning and development, and operational expenses for the organization. But as we've gone forward with brand and innovated along the customer experience kind of space, we've realized that the entire journey for a customer is critically important, and that every opportunity we have to intervene along that journey is a really important opportunity. And curating that intervention point can be an important opportunity for you and your organization to learn, to gain insights about what customers are actually after. And customer education has existed for quite some time, and customer education has been a really interesting place to innovate along these axes. And while the notion of customer education and marketing kind of joining forces around the experience of customers is not necessarily new, it is something that hasn't had as much focus historically as it probably could have gotten. And we're seeing a huge shift toward a new understanding and appreciation for why that would be the case. I think one of the things that I think helps to explain why this is such an important or critical factor is when we look at the behavior of people. So your people, so let's talk about your behavior and how you react when somebody markets a product or service to you. So pause for a second and think to yourself, what was the last product or service that you had marketed to you? Probably something on the web, or maybe some kind of a billboard, or might have been something you saw when you were driving into the office, or might be something that you're able to see from where you sit. In fact, advertisements and marketing are all around us. Probably something you saw on video, maybe something you saw on television or heard on the radio. These things are just absolutely all consuming and everywhere, right? If you pause sometimes amid the kind of nonstop waves of advertising, you will notice that you've probably seen repetitions of advertisements, but never seen those advertisements. And there's a reason for that, and that is because oftentimes people sort of put up a shield between themselves and a marketing or advertising message. That shield blocks the message out for no other reason than to basically make life livable, right? Because there's too much constant, steady stream of messaging coming in. People learn to kind of block that stuff out. Now, also, people block it out because there is a kind of tendency to see it with a grain of hostility, right? Like, oh, they're trying to sell me something. Somebody is trying to push something on me that I don't necessarily want. Well, that kind of perception of assault is something that customer education can help us get around, because customer education is generally perceived as something that adds value for you in in the sense that you desire the education or the training or the other kind of offering that's coming through that customer education experience. So for folks in customer experience, where they're constantly kind of having to think about, well, is this going to be too much? Is it going to overwhelm? Is it going to break through all the clutter? This is an interesting tool because it gives us an opportunity to break through all of that chaos. Now, when I talk about customer education, I'm not just talking about the education of endpoint B2C customers. I'm also talking about B2B customers, those folks who are addressable by you, who you need as a part of your business, but who are perhaps partners or channel, or they might be distributors, or they could be folks who have franchises. Any of those kinds of places are folks who we can think of as customers because they're outside of your organization, and therefore you can't sort of demand or command that they do something. In many cases, you don't even know exactly who that person is. You might, for example, have a number of partners who in turn have their own sales personnel, and you may desperately want to get better sales messaging and marketing alignment, better experiences into the mental awareness of those personnel who are in the downstream partner organization, but it isn't necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. A glance at this one, sourced from Forrester, you'll notice that 59% of organizational leaders are prioritizing post-sale customer experience. So not just awareness, not just kind of general invitation to customers to come in, but then ongoing things like product adoption or use, things like supporting customers who are in the pipeline to ensure that that's going well, and insights like understanding what customers are actually after. Are they happy with your products? Are they using your products? Are they looking for other products that align to your business that would be advantageous for you to understand? These are all things that customer education can actually suss out, both because the shield is down and because there are ample opportunities to dig in and explore. I'm going to check the chat quick to see what you guys are up to, see if you have similar reactions, or if you're finding that there's an increase in interest in what's happening on the customer education front within your organizations. What are you finding? Are you seeing a similar kind of thing? I see there are a couple questions about the slide deck and will it be available. It's coming out to you. And I see Amy is saying, yeah, agree that it's a post-sales is where we're starting to see increased interest in what's happening. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is that customer education can be used to attract new people. Customer education can be used to aid marketing in growing awareness of product, even through the sales cycle. Customer education is commonly used today in the post-sales cycle as a band-aid, right? So if you think, I think of this as sort of old school customer education, and this becomes effectively support, right? So we've made this product and service for customers. Now we need to support the customer, because if they have any problems, then they'll get mad at us, right? And so, you know, in the basest possible form, maybe this comes in the form of a manual or a guide that goes along with or is delivered with the product that was originally granted to the customer. The problem with that kind of thing is that it's not dynamic, and it's not actually giving you extra value, nor is it giving you extra opportunity. So advancements in customer education now give us an opportunity to actually glean insights about what customers are up to. We're actually able to track what they are doing, what they are learning, and what they're focused on, and then in real time leverage that information to send that information to other groups and departments. Think of it, if you take the entire life cycle, sales cycle of a customer, and instead of thinking of it as a funnel, bringing you down to a decision point and a buy, flip it on the side and go with a bow tie model, which I imagine many of you have seen. And that then says, okay, well, the start of our relationship with the customer is taking the broad world and squeezing it down to find people who have alignments with the products and services that makes that we provide, right? And then they reach that decision point, and then seeing every opportunity from the decision point outward as an opportunity to not just maintain the customer, but actually upsell the customer, find new opportunities to do business with the customer and those things, those are much less expensive ways to utilize the resource of those customers. And so companies are more and more finding that that is an important way that they can leverage those experiences. So think now of that bow tie model and think of every moment when you touch a customer. Maybe right after they buy something, you touch the customer with some kind of messaging. Maybe right at the decision point, you congratulate them and send them some initial messaging about additional services and solutions that you provide. Maybe right after the customer has started to use, you're starting to have some of your teams, maybe customer satisfaction, et cetera, reach out and understand, is the customer actually taking advantage of the tools and services we provide? Because if they aren't, they won't remain customers. And we want those folks to remain customers in our pipeline. So all of these touch points, including touch points from areas that you might not intuitively think, for example, marketing. If I've purchased a product or service and marketing is aware of some way that I can leverage the product or service that I might not have picked up on until after I started to really use it, then that's a perfect point for marketing to send out insights and information proactively, informing customers, hey, did you know that you can do this? Here's some information about how you can do this. Let us show you. Think of this from the perspective of, say, a makeup company. You have a makeup company. If you just produce the makeup and hand it to the customer over the counter, the number of customers who fail to apply the makeup well and therefore are disappointed with their results will actually be not encouraging. It'll be pretty high, right? A lot of fail rates. So what you want is to be able to not only provide that for them, but also be attuned to the ways that customers are learning how to apply that makeup. And if there are quirks or nuances or special functions of the way your makeup works, you definitely want to be heavily invested in the space where people go to learn this stuff. Now, there wouldn't be 100 million YouTube videos on applying makeup if it wasn't something that required an awful lot of finesse, strategy, etc. That's the kind of space where customers are obviously going to want to play. So modern customer education platforms can also take it a step further and actually allow you to be in those social spaces and at the same time gain insights, track, follow, and prompt based on what users are actually doing. So just because we're in that kind of social space doesn't mean we have to be isolated from the kinds of opportunities to reach out and touch customers and have more effective experiences with them. Shawana says we use opportunities and where we can improve, enhance customer satisfaction, retain customers, and grow business via referrals. I think those are all excellent examples, Shawana, that this provides that opportunity to kind of put in the points for leveraging. Now, the benefits of customer education are pretty immediately apparent. And one of the things that you can do to understand it a little better is to kind of think of it in terms of this kind of brief list. It's a more approachable way to reach customers. You can gather customer insights and intelligence by leveraging a good architecture to actually learn based on what customers are learning. You are able to contribute to a relevant field of knowledge. So if your field of knowledge is biochemistry, because that's the kind of products and services you deliver, then having the ability to contribute to biochemistry knowledge in general has some pretty big implications. One, it's just a benevolent thing for a company to do. But more importantly, perhaps from a marketing customer experience perspective, it's a smart thing for a company who's invested in this space to do. Because ultimately, if you are a major source of information and ideas, you will have opportunities to explain to customers why you're making the choices that you are in their particular field or discipline. And you can become a trusted resource in the field as opposed to a kind of obligation or an expectation, right? It's far better to be seen as a resource than as a vendor. And that ultimately makes a huge difference. You can also use it to enhance your brand awareness and appeal. Obviously, that means jazzing up the front end of that pipeline and that experience overall. You can reduce your support costs. This is time tested and proven over and over again. Great customer education programs will reduce your support costs, but it's not the only advantage. Notice that before that, I mentioned gather customer insights and intelligence. And that's part of what's trending here is organizations are saying, you know what? It's no longer enough to simply save the company money. I have to also help the company's bottom line through ensuring both cost savings and through ensuring increased opportunity for sales or for performance, whatever it might be. Now, if you're in a company that does, for example, healthcare or something, and you're less driven by finance, not driven by finance, but less driven by finance, your goals may be slightly different, right? You might have morbidity rates and those outcomes as a more fundamental driving source for what motivates your company. But it doesn't really change the impact that you can have. Because if you're trying to change healthcare outcomes, ultimately that means that you're trying to change minds and you're going to have a lot more opportunity for success with effective customer education than you would with basic marketing messaging. So imagine you're a hospital system and you realize that a huge amount of your overall burden is coming to you from people who are diabetic. Well, providing additional resources and training and information to your regular folks who are essentially patients could have a substantial impact on your overall goals, both in terms of reducing morbidity among your clientele, but also in terms of saving costs for your organization by reducing the costs related to treating potentially thousands or tens of thousands of patients who have diabetes, for example. So all of these things can apply even if you're not necessarily a sales centered organization. I sort of proceed with the guess that most of you are. So don't hesitate to share. Some of you may very much be driven by other kind of goals, and that's interesting. I think it helps us all to learn when you share that you've got a different set of specific needs. Okay, so in addition, it can also help you to mitigate potential legal action. So in other words, fines. We all face the possibility for fines, both from a regulatory standpoint, a compliance standpoint, but there also can be additional costs due to legal action. That happens when products and services get misused. So if somebody is doing off-label use of a pharmaceutical, that is potentially a legal hazard for you. If somebody is doing some kind of unscrupulous behavior with backhoes, that is potentially a legal hazard for you. Now, it may be that it's fine, but ultimately you don't want the court expense. You don't want the problem to exist in the first place. And when you get to personal items like makeup, etc., those hazards can become really quick, can become a big problem if people are doing things in ways that they're not advised to have done it. So mitigating those potential legal actions by augmenting your safety training is both going to reduce the rates of those kind of off-label uses, and it's going to provide a backstop for your organization to show that you proactively attempted to prevent misuse of products and services. So it has really kind of a double advantage there, and ultimately it contributes to the bottom line by avoiding and reducing those legal costs. You can create a lifelong communication channel when you do this effectively. I think of some of our customers who've done these learning academies, where the academy has been just a tremendous resource for the community. And then that becomes this way to communicate in an ongoing and trusted manner. Then you augment, give it some social learning aspect, give it some social communication space. And before you know it, you have hundreds, even thousands of customer evangelists who are promoting your products and services, who know the latest and greatest on all of the ifs and thens and the exceptions and so on. We're still looking at Forrester for the resource on that data. I'm not going to bother reading it all to you because I know that you're all adults and can read your own data. I will note, however, that customer education programs do also undergo some challenges. And those include that 77% of customer education programs face challenges due to technical debt of the employees. So they face some education challenges just getting people up to speed, not necessarily on their immediate solutions, but also on the long-term expectations. 73% of functional teams operate in silos, and so that reduces the ability to rapidly deploy, and it reduces the overall efficacy of the customer education programs. And then finally, 35% are only creating, only 35% are creating a consistent single view for customers. In other words, they are scattered all over everywhere, and those scattered experiences for customers can become somewhat daunting, right? I don't know where to find information about company X. I go to their website and then they point me to this other offsite space and then this other space and so on. And before you know it, there's a lot of customer education being done, but it's being done by other organizations. That means you're losing the insight. So you're losing the opportunity to gain from it, and you're losing control. So you're not helping your legal cause, et cetera. And you're ultimately subject to sort of hijacking, where your messaging can be completely lost as other spaces and places are picking up the role of customer education for you. So lots of potential problems with that. Who owns customer education can be difficult to identify. This from Amy. Internally, is it support, customer success managers, account managers? It ends up with lots of finger pointing, or I thought team had this covered. That is such a perfect way to describe the state of the industry in many, many organizations today, Amy. I see this over and over again. Then, and those teams generally lacking the expertise of L&D introduces a whole new problem and dynamic, in that they may not be delivering the highest quality educational experiences, and L&D may not be delivering the ideal marketing experiences. So what we have seen, we've done quite a bit of kind of exploration of this, is that ultimately marketing and customer experience tend to be the two entities that are trying to own this space. And that where I have seen the most success is where CX, marketing, and L&D have worked jointly to form units which are focused specifically on customer education, but which are informed by and sourced by customer experience marketing and L&D. And I know that sounds like it can become a really busy table really quick, but here's the thing. Marketing needs data in very specific formats, and it needs to aggregate back to common marketing experiences, right? So in other words, when we think about the new innovations that are happening where we cross over marketing and L&D, it's not just that you can gain customer insights, it's that you can gain customer insights and use a universal customer record to understand who this person is across all of their engagements with your organization, not just their educational engagements, right? So if we look at it from a traditional L&D lens, even gaining insights about what people are doing becomes kind of problematic because they're not necessarily as savvy or as excited about sharing that information about the experiences that the customers are having as they go through and get training, right? From a marketing and customer experience perspective, we're used to this notion of journeys, of the overall customer experience journey, and understanding how to guide that journey and brand that journey well throughout the entire life cycle. And that includes eyes on understanding data and analytics and leveraging AI and other resources to build upon that based on those real-time experiences that customers are having. So when a CX or a marketing group goes to deploy their customer education, they'll find that it's really hard, if not impossible, to find an architecture, a learning architecture that supports traditional and modern learning technologies in a really deep and meaningful way, and that understands how reporting works and how web presence works and integrates so that your customer education program is able to send messaging to your customer experience platforms, including things like campaigns, right? If somebody is taken every single course that you have on AI in your field, and you haven't been able to leverage that to send it to the sales management platform and send it to your customer relationships and send it to places like your campaign management to trigger subsequent mail campaigns and online campaigns and so on based on a universally understood record of who that is, then it's not doing what it needs to do from a CX perspective and a marketing perspective. Likewise, if it's not able to do stuff like offer live face-to-face training scheduling, offer virtual training scheduling, offer online education, offer social gamification, and so on, like a modern learning architecture, then it's failed. So a lot of companies have built these kludged together kind of solutions. Now, I will tell you from experience, and I'm not exaggerating, a homebrew LMS is a problematic financial investment because the cost of all of that learning architecture, building that up, is enormous. It's ongoing and it's constantly growing. So what you'll end up with is a homebrew system that does not have all the features that are needed, but that is marketing savvy, that is CX savvy, or you'll end up with a learning architecture which is learning savvy, but doesn't understand how to send those communication messages the way it needs to. It's not an open enough architecture to function with everything else. So I wonder if some of you have had those experiences, if you've tried the homebrew route, if you've struggled with I've seen development units of up to 10 or more people that are constantly working on updating homebrew solutions for companies for just this reason. So this has been that kind of thing. Hey, while we're looking at this particular Forrester report data, which gives you a little bit of a sense of what is it that makes customer education programs work, what are companies doing. This is data drawn from actual people who are building out customer education programs to kind of give you a sense of what are they doing. While we're doing that, let me ask you a question. Did you know that Ben & Jerry's has a flavor graveyard? They have a ice cream flavor graveyard. Did you guys know this? Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, this is awesome. And I think when I think about customer education, I come back to this every time. And it's because we don't jump to that, right? So the flavor graveyard is both online and there's a physical, actual graveyard. What an amazing method to reach out to your customers and help educate them about how flavors are created, about how decisions are made related to where those will be delivered and marketed, to give them an opportunity to give you feedback and insights about what might work or what might not work, all the while building an unshakable following for your organization because people see the value that you are providing in a huge variety of ways. So here, not only did they focus on customer education, but they focus on customer education about mistakes or problems or things that had not gone well. And I think that is proof that virtually anything can be the foundation for a great customer education deliverable. In the early days of the 1900s, we saw a organization come forward that focused on in a way that most people would not have predicted, and that company was Michelin. Michelin provided tires, even going back to the beginning. So you might ask yourself, what is the relationship between Michelin tires and Michelin five-star restaurants? Or if you have a buff for history and you love to explore, you might ask yourself, what are these Michelin books that explain driving across the country that give people recommendations on which restaurants and which places to go and which hotels to stay in and which roads to drive on and all that kind of thing? Well, they realized that value add is super important to customer education, and that having something that is an obvious and immediate value to people is going to be much more appealing. When we think about what are the things that motivate people, we think about purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Purpose translates to value. I will only do those things which I believe have value for me, for my team, for my company, for my family, for my community, and so on. So ultimately, when people are making decisions about are they motivated to do a thing, they're thinking in terms of purpose or value. Then they're also thinking in terms of autonomy. That simply means that they want to have choices about how and when to effectively accomplish tasks. And then they're thinking about mastery. And mastery is the ability to demonstrate effectively to themselves and others that they have mastered or gained substantial competency over a skill, right? And a skill can be anything. A skill can be naming all the flavors of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Now, you might think, oh, well, that's not necessarily something that people would want. No, apparently, a lot of people really do want to be able to do things like name all the flavors of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, or name all the defunct flavors, or talk about why flavors were cut from the market, or petition Ben and Jerry's to have more. And similarly, when we look at things like the Michelin five-star rating for restaurants, these are all derivative of customer education efforts from as early as the early 1900s. So I say that only to say that, approaches that people take to customer education can be hugely varied. You don't have to feel like you're tied down or locked down to one way, right? Um, it it can be what is right for you and your organization, and it can be creative, it can be fun, it can be um, unexpected, out of the box. And if it is, it will cut through the nonsense better. And if it adds value, then it will likely be something that sticks, that will be appreciated by customers for now and for probably years to come. I love the creativity coming from the chat, folks talking about singing the McDonald's hymn to Ben and Jerry's flavors. Um, uh, Absolutely, that sounds great. And I think that, like, getting your creative mind going is so critically important. Yeah, a lot of what I do is work with companies that are implementing their learning management systems or learning management architecture and so on. And in the early days, this was often people coming to me sort of saying, does it do A, B, C, D? And I think this had to do with the way companies sold their learning management systems. They would sort of come up with this list to say, here are all the features and functions. And then people, when they were selecting them, would go through this list of 600, 800, 1,000 features, and they would compare to see which one was, which one did to all of these functions and features in what way. The reality is that I don't think that's a smart way to look at your learning architecture anymore. I think that architectures for learning have to be as open as other enterprise systems, and that they have to be completely integratable and extensible with your other enterprise systems. That way, you are the one defining what the programs and solutions you're implementing actually are, rather than the tool or the architecture defining what the programs and solutions are. So I always encourage folks who are starting to think about what should we do for our architecture to instead think about what are the initiatives that we expect to implement with our architecture. Let's start there and let's find out what would that look like in an architecture for us. What would we need to do to make that happen? Those are the projects I get the most excited about. Those are the projects that always do the best. Those are the projects that get people promoted. Those are the projects that race forward and that customers are happy with. So I think engaging the creative brain is really critically important. And it's safer today than ever to assume that the architecture that you use can, if it's a good architecture, it should be able to extend to meet whatever needs you have. More and more, I'm seeing companies do things like offer gamification incentives. I've seen one company do this incredible thing where their employees wear a certain uniform with aprons and stuff, and they did little virtual cute little chibi avatars, and their employees went nuts for it, right? That the employees can use their learning, their training, to earn gamification points that they trade for new virtual costumes. Well, if you play games, you know that that's the kind of thing that people do online in their evenings. So it's not any shock that they're eager to do it in the process of building out their kind of knowledge overall. But just a reminder of those basic motivators. They are very universal. Purpose, autonomy, mastery. Is there value? Do they have choice? And is there an opportunity for them to clearly demonstrate to themselves, to their colleagues, to their supervisors, their leadership, that they have mastered the kinds of skills and things? And that works the same with customer education, works the same with internal employees, works the same with external employees, folks who happen to be at partners and so on. So Oh, I am so sorry. I told you about what makes customer education programs work, and I forgot to change the slide for you. Let me, let me pause on this slide for a second. This proves that my presentations are occasionally flawed. I apologize. This is the slide you were meant to be seeing. The source here is Forrester. It's about leveling up the customer experience with customer education programs. Here you can see some great stats. 54% are leveraging microlearning. 52% of customer education programs connect moments of formal learning interspersed with practice. 50% are using social learning or cohort-based learning. 41% using experiential learning in customer education programs. 49% ensure that customer education programs are interactive. And 32% digitize the classroom experience into video formats. Less common, obviously, to do that kind of digitization of the classroom experience because it's not as appealing as these things which are interactive. I like to think of it in terms of a heat map, mapping those things which are the most interactive and engaged as being the most likely to be long lived, to do well on knowledge transfer, and to be appreciated overall. So if you have opportunities to leverage the existing training to make it interactive, that's critically important. Even when we do these webinars like this, I generally ask if we can have chat open so that I can see, like someone just shouted that it must be interactive, because now we're at least having a sort of conversation, you know. Webinars are kind of a weird format because sometimes you're talking to 1,000 people and you don't necessarily fall into that bucket. And I love what Jeannie says, the clicks should be purposeful, not annoying. That's exactly right. Don't just put clicks for clicks' sake. Actually have the clicks bear some impact, right? I love the approach of a company called Jellyvision, which originally Jellyvision created You Don't Know Jack. So if you know You Don't Know Jack, the trivia game, or maybe you know the party pack. Originally Jellyvision was behind this kind of thing, but they then broke off and started doing interactive training and learning. And they continue to follow this one policy, which I think is brilliant and more people should follow all the time. And it's that learning is more effective when it's interrogative. Let me unprofessor that for you. Learning is more effective when it's a real conversation with experiences based on the conversation that conform to the choices that a person actually made. So when they produce a kind of an introduction to a learning unit, even if it's about something dreadfully dull like choosing your insurance plan, they'll start with asking you questions about yourself, your preferences, your needs, and so on. They do it with tongue in cheek, light heart, little comedies, some soundtracks and effects and all that kind of stuff. And before you know it, it feels like you're having a conversation. Now, the research backs this up. If you go back to Clark and Myers, e-learning and the psychology of instruction, you will find that those interactions are important. And just as I think it was Jennifer just shouted out a minute ago, those interactions have to be genuine. So you need to consider that it shouldn't be just one click where everybody clicks the same thing and then they move on to the next slide. That's the next button. It should instead be real and meaningful differentiation based on the individual experiences of the people who are actually taking the training. And it can manifest in all different kinds of ways. You can use it for polling people. Sometimes those clicks result in you helping them identify that the approach they're using to do something might be problematic, or sometimes they help you to reinforce ideas that you want to kind of quick quiz them on with informal formative feedback. Any of those kind of things will significantly improve the results that you're getting. So yeah, again, sorry about the slide craziness. Okay, so how customer education academies can really help in this context. Um, Essentially, the challenge is that organizations have to align their customer education tech. They have to bring that all together and reduce their overall tech debt. The approach that you can take through customer education academies is to integrate learning as part of an existing customer web experience whole, because you can bring it all together and do it from wherever. Like today, like the old world, and a learning architecture meant you had to send people into the LMS dungeon where they would be miserable because it wasn't branded. It was not giving them the interactive experience that they're accustomed to. It didn't recognize them. Their achievements there were kind of isolated to that space. That doesn't have to be the case anymore. So integrating that into your overall solution means, if you have a customer facing web portal, that's where your education program should be. And they shouldn't have to leave it to have the customer education experiences. That should be a launch point for those customer education experiences. Even for live customer education experiences, it should be a place where they can schedule, search them, discover them, figure out, plan them, talk about them, even have gamification experiences around them. You want to personalize those experiences so that you narrow in the lens of who you're talking to. Even before you deal with the actual training materials, you want to already show them that you know who they are, you recognize them, you know what their interests are, and that you're going to give them offers, et cetera, which align to their skills. We can leverage AI to do that today. All of those approaches are very effective. And then we want to be able to engage the customers with social and gamification. And we want to drive on-point communication with things like micro-learning. So we want learning that pops right up in front of them, that doesn't take very long to complete, that accomplishes a set of goals, that has obvious follow-ups, that rewards them or acknowledges their success or reward in relationship to their mastery and growth and so on. And then when we look at things like customer education academies, we can also then see a distinct impact because it gives you a chance to maximize that customer time to value by producing very, very rapid interventions. It also helps you unlock the product potential, reduces the support costs, and it drives marketing initiatives based on the learning data that can be gleaned. So if we look at that then from this perspective, sorry about that. If we look at that then from this, I'm watching my clock because I don't want to go over. If we look at that from this perspective, we can see that we want to narrow it down to a segment of one. In other words, in terms of the customer experience and the learning experience for the customer, we want to leverage things like AI to deliver personalized learning journeys for that one person. It should recognize them, focus on them, know what their skills and interests are, follow their behaviors and patterns, and be able to deliver all kinds of things like nudges, suggestions, recommendations for courses and training and social experiences and so on that are all delivered with an integrated overall experience across your entire enterprise stack. So in other words, avoid the tech jargon. You want your um, sales relationship management software to speak to your learning software, which speaks to your web deployment software, your front-facing web face, which speaks to your back-end tools and services, which you're using to build up and leverage that kind of central hub. Why central? Because when it's decentralized, it causes difficulties for the customers. It's hard for them to find things. And ultimately, this gives them that single point of reference where they can go and find what they need to find related to your goods and services, experiences, etc. Um, so then you want your marketing to focus on the data which you're able to actually glean based on what's happening. So not only do you want to understand what's happening in terms of their relationship to the overall customer experience, but you also want to follow the learner experience inside the learning architecture. And so it needs to have the same ability to understand the flow, where people went, what they did, what they were interested in, so on, that you would leverage on a typical marketing front end. It needs to be able to do that in terms of the learning data, deliver that intelligence, and then share those insights out with things like Marketo, for example, a customer campaign management kind of solutions. Then it has to be easy access. I talked earlier about purpose, autonomy, and mastery. I left out an important one, and that is obstacle. Any obstacle between your customer and the learning will simply result in a walkaway. This, by the way, is true for every level of engagement of learners. If they can't get to it, they will just walk away and they will almost certainly never return. So there have to be a complete removal of all potential obstacles between the customer and the actual end experience. So everything needs to be delivered in an HTML5 environment, needs to be delivered in a universal environment, needs to be completely ubiquitous. It needs to be as smooth as humanly possible. And then finally, you have to have continuous engagement, just like you would for marketing experiences. We deliver that through gamification, learning journeys, learning paths, social learning, all of those kinds of solutions. And with that, I think that I have run my clock a little bit over. I'll jump here just to mention that Adobe Learning Manager is Adobe's solution for customer education, both for B2C and B2B customer education experiences. It's also our solution for internal education, and it is a great technology stack to kind of support these kind of customer education deliveries. Let's see, what are the questions like, Liz? How are we doing? Did I answer them all while we were going?
I think so. Apologies, did you answer Pam's question about, you said everything needs to be in HTML5, so no more, I believe it's SCORM or SCORM.
SCORM is perfectly legit, right? Because you rely on your technology architecture stack to convert your SCORM into HTML5. So if there was a no more in here, it would be no more Flash or no more plugin architecture, that kind of thing. But it's interestingly not or doesn't have to be no more PDF, no more PowerPoint, no more Word. That's not the case at all. Architectures like Adobe's actually allow you to just upload your PowerPoint, your PDF, your Word docs, all that stuff, and then it converts it to HTML5 on the back end. So things like streaming video, things like streaming audio, interactive e-learning courses in a SCORM wrapper, those can all be loaded in to your existing learning architecture if the architecture supports it, and then it should convert it to HTML5. Certainly Adobe's does. And then once it's been converted, you don't have to worry about anything because the learner is always going to be coming in with that kind of HTML5 architecture, and you don't have to worry that they needed any additional technology. So that's the key message there is just you want to have a stack, a tech stack that handles conversion of all these things. Is the source in like e-learning courses and stuff, is that still SCORM? Yes. AICC? Yes. XAPI as in tin can for those of us who are old school? Yes. So all of those architectures can be supported in a single unified platform. And then what it does is it leverages HTML5 to handle the delivery. So SCORM is more about the back-end reporting and the data tracking and visualization. The format for delivery on the front end is where the HTML5 comes into play. Great question. What else have we got?
Perfect. So Amy just popped in the chat. Do you have recommendations in terms of what customer education is available to all customers, aka free, not protected within a platform versus customers need a license to say an LMS to access training content?
I do have specific recommendations, and we don't have much time for an example. I'll show you just a quick. This is a customer example. JLG produces lifts for airlines and other organizations, and here's an example of their academy, their online learning academy. And you'll notice that a lot of their courses and stuff are free, but not all. So what I recommend is that you do something sort of similar to this, right? That ultimately you want to be able to have a system which can handle charging for certain things. A key example, whoops, what did I do? I did something crazy. What isn't it services that I want? I don't know. I don't want services, I guess. Anyway, they for example have on-site visits where people need to go and they have hotel expenses and all that kind of stuff. And that has to be scheduled in advance. So you want something that can schedule it, something that can bill for it, something that, can handle the transactions, taking the payment and all that kind of stuff. But you also want to be able to preview courses online for free. So you want to be able to say, okay, well, actually, when that customer's on our website, all of our product training, which is actually pre-sales pipeline building interest, we want that to be free in most cases. So that's how I would recommend divvying it up, is saying, okay, well, those things which are marketing to help people understand why they might make a purchase decision, those things should all be free and freely available, and they probably don't need registration. Now, a lot of our customers have said, okay, but actually what we want to do is we'll give them 2 courses for no registration. We'll still offer everything free, but we'll ask them to register. We've had some customers who said, okay, let them take the course for a certain period of time and then throw up a login kind of thing. Or some customers that say, well, they can preview it, but they can't take any interactions or exams or anything like that unless they log in. And these are very typical web tactics. People are used to them. If they've seen a value, then it's time to go ahead and get them into your system, because there's not as much that you can do before you have clarity of who they are. And then once you have clarity of who they are, then it's much easier and it becomes possible to extend that out to your other knowledge about the learner in general.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. We are getting close to time. However, there are some lingering questions, so you will have
Sure.
access to all of those, and you can totally reply to them via email. But thank you so much again. It has been a pleasure. I know we always have you around and appreciate you so much always.
Thanks so much, Liz, and thanks to all the good folks at Training Industry. Thanks to all of you for joining today's session. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Yes, always. Thank you, everybody. So I invite you all to join us for some up and coming training industry webinars this year. You can register for these programs and watch past webinars now at trainingindustries.com. All training industry webinars are pre-qualified for a credit hour by HRCI, SHRM, ISPI, and CPTM. If you're wondering what CPTM is, it's the Certified Professional in Training Management program that will empower you to manage the future training needs of your organization. You can participate in several programs held within the US or join us for a virtual practicum from anywhere in the world. Find more information at trainingindustries.com/training. Lastly, an evaluation survey should have popped open in another tab in your browser and would appreciate hearing your feedback from today's session. Thanks again to today's speaker, Dr. Allen, and our sponsor, Adobe. Lastly, thank you for your time and attention today. See you next time.